In the hush between the waves, where moonlight shatters like glass upon black water, I first saw him, tall as a mast, dark as a storm, and burning like a demon of the sea. Before we begin, wanderer, subscribe, for the shadows of this tale stretch long and vanish too quickly into the fog if no lantern is held against them. Lean closer, for what I am about to speak is not a children's fable, nor a sailor's tall tale. It is the truth of a shadow that once walked the Atlantic, a man who became a myth while still drawing breath, and whose ghost still lingers in the fog-bound sands of the Outer Banks. He was Edward Teach, though the world would come to know him as Blackbeard. Picture him now, towering, broader than a mast, his boots thick and stiffened with salt, striking the deck with the cadence of a storm's drumbeat. His coat hung from his shoulders like a funeral shroud, dark as a clouded sky, impervious to wind or rain. But it was the beard that defined him, black as a drowned night, braided in serpentine coils, threaded with slow-burning fuses that hissed and crackled, sending tendrils of fire curling like smoke around his face. Some swore it glowed in the darkest night, like hell's own lanterns, making him look less man than specter. And the eyes, steady, dark, burning with unspoken purpose, could pierce a man's courage through the fog. He was not a man to be trifled with. His cutlasses, nicked and worn, hung at his hip, and across his chest rested 4 pistols, each a silent promise of death. His hat, wide and crooked, cast a shadow across his face, a crown for a king of terror. When he stepped onto a ship, the very air seemed to draw back, holding its breath, for all knew the shape approaching them was no ordinary man, but a force shaped from smoke, fire, and fear itself. Edward Teach was born around 1680 in the fog-laden alleys of Bristol, England, where boys learned to knot ropes before they could write their own names. He grew up watching the tides rise and fall, learning early the whispers of the wind and the temper of the sea. As a young man, he served on merchant ships, then under privateers during Queen Anne's War, which ended in 1713. The war's end left thousands of men adrift, hungry, skilled in violence, and unbound by law. Edward Teach did not surrender to poverty. He chose a path that would make him immortal. By 1716, he had joined Captain Benjamin Hornigold in the Caribbean, learning the craft of piracy. And yet, it was not merely skill that would define him. It was spectacle, terror made visible. Teach realized that fear could be a weapon sharper than any blade. The beard grew, the fuses were added, and the darkness wrapped tighter around him, until men whispered that he was no longer entirely human. In 1717, he captured the French slave ship La Concorde and refitted her into the Queen Anne's Revenge, 40 cannons bristling along her deck like metallic teeth. With her beneath him, Blackbeard became a walking storm. Ports trembled at his approach, merchantmen fled before he raised sail, and rival pirates spoke his name in hushed tones. Yet even as he sowed terror, he commanded loyalty. His crew followed him through cannon smoke and hurricane winds, for he shared the spoils, and they believed in his invincibility. The Outer Banks became his throne, a land of shifting sands and treacherous shoals, a place where storms could rise in an instant and where compasses spun in despair. Here, he found the perfect stage for his growing legend. The inlet near Ocracoke Island, later called Teach's Hole, was his sanctuary, a labyrinth of water and shadow where the ordinary laws of men could not reach him. There he anchored, traded, feasted, and vanished as if swallowed by the sea itself. Lanterns bobbed mysteriously along the shoreline at night. Whispers of his presence rippled through the fishing villages. Sailors claimed to hear his voice carried on the wind, a low rumble promising doom, and some swore they glimpsed his shadow pacing the sands in the moonlight, searching for some lost piece of himself. Blackbeard's rise was swift and merciless. Where others relied on force, he relied on fear. Ships surrendered at the sight of him, their crews trembling, the cannon never fired. And yet beneath the myth was a man, sharp, strategic, a scholar of dread. He knew the power of stories. He cultivated them, letting rumor and terror do the work of steel. When he smiled, it was as if he held the fate of a dozen lives in that curl of his lips. When he raised a pistol, it was not merely a weapon, it was a declaration. Some nights, they say, he would stand at the prow of the Queen Anne's Revenge, fuses glowing in his beard, eyes like coals in the gloom, and survey the waters he ruled. The wind tugged at his coat, but it clung stubbornly to his shoulders, as though the world feared to let it fall. He walked like a king without a throne, a god of chaos and shadow, commanding attention without words, making every man aboard feel the pulse of destiny tighten like a noose. And yet, for all his terror, there was cunning beneath the fire. He did not spill blood needlessly. He took what he needed and left the rest to fear. That, too, became part of the myth. The merciless pirate who could kill with a glance, who could command obedience with silence, whose very presence turned men's hearts cold. In 1718, Blackbeard had become a force untouchable by ordinary law, a living nightmare whose shadow stretched across the Atlantic. Yet even legends have their turning point. Rival governors, tired of his power and the chaos he wrought, plotted his downfall. And though the ocean belonged to him, though the winds obeyed his will, the human world began to tighten its noose. But that, dear listener, is a story for another night. Tonight, we remember the birth of a shadow, the rise of the man who became a ghost before death could claim him. The year was 1718, and the colonies trembled under the silent rule of a man the ocean itself seemed to fear. Yet Governor Alexander Spotswood of Virginia could no longer tolerate that shadow. With jealousy gnawing through his reason and ambition clouding his judgment, he plotted in secrecy. He dispatched Lieutenant Robert Maynard with orders whispered more like curses than commands, urging him southward to the treacherous waters of the Outer Banks, waters that any wise sailor avoided unless driven by desperation or madness. Spotswood had no legal authority in Carolina, but law means nothing in the face of a man obsessed. And so the hunt began, as cold and relentless as winter's tide. On the night before Blackbeard's final dawn, Ocracoke Inlet was swallowed by a strange, heavy fog, so thick that even lanterns appeared as floating embers trapped in gray cloth. The men anchored nearby later swore that Teach moved differently that night, slower, heavier, as if listening to something deep beneath the waves. Some heard him whisper, not to his crew, but to the water, soft words, indecipherable, carried away by the tide before human ears could form meaning from them. Perhaps it was a farewell. Perhaps it was an invocation. Or perhaps, as the sailors whispered afterward, it was the sea responding to him. Dawn broke with gunfire. Maynard's ships burst from the thinning mist, unleashing cannon smoke so thick it mingled with the fog, turning the world into a gray purgatory. Blackbeard did not hesitate. He charged forth like a figure carved from flame and shadow. Shots tore through his flesh, once, twice, thrice, yet he pressed on. Blades slashed him open, across the torso, through the arms, deep into muscle, and still he advanced. Witnesses later testified that he had been shot 5 times and stabbed over 20, yet his steps remained deliberate, almost inhuman. And in his final breath, when Lieutenant Maynard struck the killing blow, Blackbeard did not collapse as any mortal would. His body, severed from its head, took 3 slow steps across the deck before falling. Those 3 steps would echo longer than his entire lifetime. Maynard kept the severed head as a trophy, hanging it from his bow as he sailed away in triumphant dread. But triumph turned quickly to terror. The sea grew restless beneath them, heaving in unnatural rhythms. Waves rose without wind, slamming the ship with the rage of something unseen. At night, the crew heard heavy footsteps pacing across the deck, though no living man walked there. A low voice, deep, graveled, unmistakable, rolled through the hull like underwater thunder. And when they finally reached calmer waters, Maynard discovered that Blackbeard's headless body, which had been weighted and thrown into the inlet, had disappeared. How a corpse freed itself from rope and stone is a question no sailor has ever dared to answer aloud. The first ghost sighting occurred within weeks. A merchant ship near Ocracoke reported a lantern drifting above the surface of the water, moving with intention, not current. It bobbed closer, brighter, redder, as though embers smoldered behind the glass. But behind the glow, the men saw a shape, tall, broad, silent, a silhouette crowned with smoke instead of hair. It hovered above the water for several heartbeats, and when the ship's crew screamed and scrambled, the light vanished as though swallowed by the sea itself. From that night onward, no sailor who passed the inlet doubted the truth. Blackbeard had not stayed dead. Ocracoke Island began to change. Fog lingered longer there than anywhere else on the banks, curling through trees and over dunes like a living thing. The winds carried whispers, deep, dragging, rhythmic, as if someone were breathing just behind the veil of mist. Fishermen refused to sail at night for fear they'd glimpse Teach's light, the wandering lantern said, to precede the ghost himself. Those who did see it claimed the glow flickered red and gold, the exact shade of burning fuses once woven into Blackbeard's beard. And on the rare nights when storms boiled over the horizon with impossible speed, islanders barricaded themselves inside, for it was said that the headless captain walked freely during tempests, searching, always searching. Over the decades, the legend did not fade. It grew teeth. Sailors spoke of a phantom ship slicing through waves, lanterns blazing without flame, sails torn yet full of wind. Others swore that a massive figure boarded their decks during storms, his footsteps thundering across the planks, though no shape could be seen. Many reported hearing the clatter of weapons below deck, or the low hum of a voice that did not belong to any man still breathing. And each story wove itself into the next, until the Outer Banks and Blackbeard became inseparable, one a place of shifting sands and treacherous tides, the other a spirit born from those very elements. In time, people believed the truth that scholars refused to write. Blackbeard did not merely haunt the Outer Banks, he became them. The storms were his rage, the fog his breath, the tides his restless wandering. He fused with the place that shaped his legend, becoming a permanent wound carved into the coastline. And even now, on nights when the sea turns black and the wind sleeps, those who know the old stories swear they can see him standing just beyond the surf, tall and silent, the air around him flickering with phantom emberlight. Blackbeard's ghost, does not walk the outer banks because he cannot rest. He walks because the outer banks cannot forget him. You may think, listener, that a ghost as violent as Blackbeard would be content tormenting sailors and storm-ridden shores, but you misunderstand the nature of legends born in salt and blood. A restless spirit does not merely haunt. It spreads, the way ink spreads through a map, corrupting every inch of coastline it touches. And so the terror that began in Ocracoke twisted itself along the outer banks like a serpent crawling through the dunes, carrying with it tales of shipwrecks, curses, omens, and the silent war between the living and the dead. The villagers noticed first. They said the air changed, thickened, until breathing felt like inhaling seawater. Old fishermen complained that their nets came up heavy, not with fish, but with objects that should never return. Rust-eaten pistols, broken cutlasses, and pieces of Blackbeard's ruined Queen Anne's Revenge, though the ship had sunk 100 miles away off Beaufort Inlet back in 1718. The pieces were warm to the touch. Some said they pulsed, as though the ship still remembered something. And then came the shipwrecks, fast and merciless. The Outer Banks has always been a graveyard of the Atlantic. Nearly 2,000 wrecks scattered beneath its waters like bones. But in the months after Blackbeard's return, those wrecks began aligning with a strange pattern. Captains reported that invisible forces dragged their vessels off course, pulling them toward the same cursed channel near Ocracoke, the place where his headless body was thrown into the sea. Men tried fighting the current, but their ropes snapped, their compasses spun wildly, and their sails tore under a wind that blew only in the direction of the grave. Some wrecks were small, sloops crushed against hidden shoals. Others were immense, a merchant brig from Barbados shattered in the shallows, its survivors claiming they saw a ghostly figure standing knee-deep in the surf, raising its sword in silent command. When the sea finally calmed, bodies washed ashore with strange symbols scratched into their skin, lines shaped like the outline of a beard or the jagged trail of burning fuses. But it was not merely shipwrecks that marked his growing dominion. Strange omens began to plague the islands. Horses refused to cross certain roads at dusk. Dogs howled at empty doorways and then refused to go near the water for days. Children spoke of a man with no face standing on the dunes, watching them with the patience of a predator. At night, windows rattled even when the wind slept, as though unseen knuckles tapped gently, asking to be let inside. The oldest residents, men and women who knew the sea the way priests know scripture, began to mutter that this was not simply a haunting, but a reclaiming. They said Blackbeard had left behind caches of treasure scattered across these islands in 1717 and 1718, buried deep beneath sand and marsh. Spanish gold, stolen silver, weapons, maps of uncharted waters, and dark relics stolen from ships that practiced forbidden rituals. Relics he believed would make him immortal. The villagers whispered that these artifacts had awoken when his spirit returned, each one functioning like a beacon calling him home. And if the relics were calling, then Blackbeard was answering. Travelers passing through the banks began reporting a ghastly sound, chains dragging across the sand, though no one walked there. The rattling always came from the direction of the old pirate coves, and always at night. Some brave souls followed the noise, but they found nothing except footprints, massive footprints, leading into the waves, never out of them. It was during this time that the first drowned men appeared, sailors who should have died in wrecks, but rose again, waterlogged and silent. wandering the beaches with their eyes rolled white. Some washed ashore trembling yet alive, whispering that they had seen a captain walking under the water as if it were solid ground. Others did not return at all. Those who survived could not bear the presence of lantern light afterward. They said it reminded them of the glow in the ghost's burning neck. But perhaps the most chilling sign of all came in late 1719, during the height of the autumn storms. A group of lighthouse keepers near Cape Lookout swore they saw, through the rain and thunder, a massive silhouette moving across the top of the water. Not swimming, not drifting, walking with long strides, dragging a heavy chain across the sea's surface. The figure paused at the beacon's shining tower, raised a ghostly cutlass, and the light flickered, once, twice, and died for several minutes. Ships crashed during those dark minutes. When the light returned, the figure was gone, leaving behind only the echo of a laugh, rising through the storm like the voice of a drowned king. The legend grew like a knot tightening around the islands. The people of the banks began marking their doors with chalk symbols to keep the ghost away. Sailors carved crosses into their masts. Fishermen refused to sail on the anniversary of his death. And still the hauntings grew stronger, as if feeding on the fear itself. The Outer Banks had become a battleground, not between nations, but between memory and myth, between the world of the living and the restless hunger of a pirate who refused to stay dead. For Blackbeard's ghost was no longer confined to the water. It walked the dunes. It stood beside beds. It watched from the trees with no eyes. It whispered from the surf with no tongue. The boundary between past and present had collapsed, and Edward Teach had become something more than a man, more than a pirate, more than a ghost. He had become a storm, and storms do not retreat. You might imagine, dear listener, that such horrors would drive the people of the Outer Banks to flee, abandon their homes, their docks, their fragile lives balanced between sea and sand. But fear has a strange way of turning into obsession. Humans are drawn to the monstrous the way ships are drawn to reefs, slowly, blindly, and with a terrible certainty. And so, instead of escaping the ghost that stalked their shores, the people began to search for answers, dredging up memories, rumors, and long-buried truths about Blackbeard's final days. Truths that had been whispered for decades, but never spoken aloud. For the legend of a haunting is one thing. The legend of a curse is another. It began with a sailor named Tobias Knight, once a wealthy official and rumored accomplice of Blackbeard himself. His name lingered in the records of 1718, tied to secret letters, hidden supplies, and silent agreements. Some claimed he provided protection for the pirate, trading favors for treasure. After Blackbeard's death, Knight faded into quiet disgrace, but shortly before his final breath in 1719, he muttered a phrase that chilled those who heard it. He made a pact, and the sea remembers. A pact. The word slithered across the islands like a shadow no flame could dispel. People began digging into the archives of the colonies, into naval reports, into journals rotting in trunks beneath floorboards. And there, tucked between dates and maps, they uncovered something more sinister than gunpowder or greed. Blackbeard had hunted not just ships, but symbols, objects taken from Spanish galleons, relics said to carry the power of protection, fortune, and damnation. These relics were rumored to be pieces of a ritual, an old maritime superstition that promised invincibility to captains who completed it. Invincibility, not in life, but after death. The more the villagers learned, the more they recoiled in horror. For they realized that Blackbeard's brutality in his final months, the raids in 1718, the sudden cruelty, the reckless bloodshed, had not been madness, but preparation. His reign was not simply for plunder, but for ascension, as though he believed himself destined to rise beyond flesh, beyond breath, beyond the grave itself. And if that was true, then his return as a ghost was not an accident. It was a fulfillment. The curse spread beyond rumor when a group of scholars and ministers arrived on the banks in late 1719, sent by colonial authorities to investigate the rising panic. They carried crosses, scriptures, and a confidence that looked foolish against the raging sea. They questioned survivors, charted shipwrecks, and examined strange objects dredged from the water, coins fused together by unnatural heat, silver etched with symbols no one recognized, a rusted compass that spun wildly even when held still. At first, they dismissed the ghost stories. They called them hallucinations, fear, maritime folklore. But then, one night, during an autumn gale, the scholars heard a roar, deep, thunderous, and inhuman, echoing across the inlet. Lanterns blew out, horses broke free from their posts, and from the ocean rose a white column of mist, shaped like a towering figure with broad shoulders and a burning glow flickering at its neck. The scholars fled, but one, Reverend Samuel Briggs, collapsed on the sand, sobbing, insisting he had seen a sword made of seawater raised high in judgment. The next morning, he vanished. His footprints led toward the water and stopped abruptly at the tide line. The sea had taken him, or something within it had claimed him. From that moment on, the investigators did not speak of superstition. They spoke of containment. For they feared that the ghost's power was growing, not only haunting the shores, but anchoring itself to the land, feeding on storm-wrecked souls, on fear, on the restless memory of every man who died beneath Blackbeard's flag. They feared the curse was expanding beyond the banks, and they were right. Ships reported hauntings farther north, off Virginia, even as far as the Chesapeake. Merchant captains swore they saw a phantom silhouette pacing across moonlit waters, dragging chains that rattled like cannon fire. A British naval crew claimed their mast cracked at the exact moment a headless shadow passed across their deck. And always, near the horizon, sailors glimpsed a faint red glow, like burning fuses swaying in an invisible beard. The curse was no longer tied to Ocracoke alone. It was spreading, but there was more, something even darker buried beneath all the fear, all the wrecks, all the rising dread. For among the recovered artifacts was a final chilling discovery, a torn page from Blackbeard's own logbook, dated the night before his death, November 21st, 1718. The ink was smeared, the letters frantic, but one line was clear. Should they take my head, I shall command the sea without it. Command the sea without it. Those words confirmed what the villagers already feared. Blackbeard never expected death to end him. He expected it to free him. He believed his body, his blood, his final stand at Ocracoke, all of it, was merely the opening act of a reign that would outlast kings and nations. And the sea had answered. Now the investigators faced a horrifying truth. Blackbeard's ghost was not wandering. It was rising, gathering strength, expanding its dominion like a new kingdom of the drowned. Every wreck fed him. Every storm strengthened him. Every terrified whisper carved his legend deeper into reality. The living no longer ruled the coast. They were trespassers. The Outer Banks had become his empire, and the dead had begun to march. You feel it now, don't you, listener? That tightening in the chest, that cold blooming beneath the ribs. Because the story is no longer a tale about a dead pirate. It is a story about a world beginning to kneel to something that should not exist. By the dawn of 1720, the Outer Banks had become a place where fear was not an emotion, but a climate, thick as fog, constant as tide. And the ghost of Edward Teach, Blackbeard, was no longer a whisper haunting lonely shores. He was a force reshaping the very rhythm of life along the coast. People stopped calling him a spirit. They began calling him a sovereign. The villagers spoke in low voices of a night when the sea glowed red, as if lit from beneath by burning embers. They said they saw silhouettes, dozens, moving beneath the surface, as though the drowned men he claimed were assembling into something like a crew. Their limbs drifted with the currents, but their heads turned in unison toward the shore, awaiting command. And on the horizon, towering above the waves, stood that headless shape, broad, unyielding, poised like a captain inspecting his ranks. Superstition hardened into terror when storms began arriving with unnatural precision. They did not drift aimlessly across the Atlantic. They came straight for Ocracoke, Cape Lookout, Body Island, Hatteras. Every tempest followed the same path, as if answering to a single will. And in each storm, sailors swore they saw black sails flapping in rain and lightning, tattered, impossible sails with no ship beneath them. Just canvas floating in the air like shrouds, guided by a presence invisible but undeniable. The people tried to fight back. Ministers held mass prayers on the beaches. Sailors hammered iron nails into doors and posts, believing iron could repel spirits. Some even attempted a ritual burial in the sand, carving a shallow grave and praying aloud for the sea to release the dead. But at the moment their prayer ended, a monstrous wave rose, not wind-driven, not tide-borne, and smashed the shoreline, swallowing their altar whole. When the waters receded, the sand was marked by deep gouges, as if clawed by enormous hands. Fear drove the colonies into action. By spring of 1720, word of the hauntings reached beyond the Carolina coast to Williamsburg, even to London. Reports spoke not of folklore, but of maritime collapse, ships refusing to sail, trade routes failing, insurance rates skyrocketing due to unexplained wrecks. The British Crown quietly dispatched scouts, naval officers, scholars, anything that might restore order to the coast. Among them was a man named Captain Jonathan Markham, a veteran of Queen Anne's War, and one of the few survivors who had witnessed Blackbeard alive. He had seen those burning fuses in his beard, the monstrous height, the eyes that burned hotter than any cannon's spark. Markham did not laugh at legends. He came armed not only with muskets and sabers, but with an artifact sealed in iron, a relic taken years ago from Blackbeard's plunder, believed to be tied to the pirate's curse. Though no record described it in detail, witnesses later said the relic pulsed like a heartbeat. Markham believed the key to ending the haunting was not exorcism, nor prayer, nor force, but return. Return of something Blackbeard lost, something he needed. Perhaps treasure, perhaps the relic, perhaps the missing head. The thought chilled even Markham's hardened blood. But every legend pointed to the same truth. A ghost deprived of its remains is a ghost condemned to wander, and a ghost desperate enough to tear the world apart to reclaim itself. Driven by necessity, Markham assembled a small crew, sailors, a priest, 2 scholars, and set out toward Teach's Hole, the place where Blackbeard fell in 1718. The night they arrived was unnaturally calm, no wind, no waves. The sea looked like black glass, reflecting the lanterns as if the water were a mirror into another world. They anchored in silence, and as the crew stared into the depths, one by one they felt something watching them from below, as if thousands of eyes were open in the water. Markham lowered a weighted chest containing the relic into the sea, hoping the offering would break the curse. But the moment it touched the surface, the water lit red, bright, burning red, as if the ocean itself were bleeding. The crew staggered back, gripping the rails in terror, and beneath the ship, a colossal shadow rose, a shape broader than any hull, taller than any mast. It climbed upward through the crimson glow, its outline unmistakable, a man of impossible size, shoulders like cliffs, arms like masts, and no head. The sea erupted. The ship lurched, ropes snapped, lanterns burst into flame. The crew screamed as phantoms clawed over the railings, waterlogged bodies with empty eyes, mouths gaping in silent obedience. They did not attack. They bowed toward the towering ghost rising above them, chains rattling like thunder dragged across metal. And then, oh God, those chains lifted as though held by invisible hands and swung outward in a motion that could only mean one thing: command. The drowned obeyed. They seized the chest, tore it from Markham's grasp, and pulled it beneath the surface with shocking force. Markham lunged after it, and in that final glimpse before he vanished into the depths, witnesses swore they saw the headless ghost lean closer, as if acknowledging him, as if accepting the offering, as if claiming the crew, the ship, the sea. By dawn, the waters were calm again. The storm clouds drifted away, the currents stilled, but the ship was gone. In its place, debris floated silently. A shredded flag, a broken mast, a single boot, and etched into the shattered wood, burned by some supernatural heat, were 5 words: "This sea has a king." From that day on, no one questioned it. No one doubted. No one spoke lightly of the legend. Blackbeard was no longer a ghost. He was a ruler, and the ocean was his throne.